All right, Megan. So you describe yourself as someone who really likes to emphasize the power of the basics, things like quality sleep, daily movement, mindful eating. So my question to you, as someone who wholeheartedly believes the exact same thing, is why do people complicate this stuff so much?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a big reason why we tend to do that is because then it feels like we're doing something. And we sort of have this tendency to, think the simple things can't possibly work. But the more, if I make it super complicated and really hard and it's really uncomfortable, then that must be working. And I think we can get really caught up in those little detail things and trying to make it just sort of feel like we are making progress or doing something really hard, when in reality, sticking to those basics and like getting really consistent on the foundations is what's ultimately going to help you make progress over time.
Right. That I definitely agree. So what I'm hearing is that when we complicate things or overcomplicate them, it feels like we're doing more. Whereas the simple stuff, maybe just, even though it is technically what will work in the long run, in the short term, it doesn't quite feel like we're actually making strides in the right direction.
Yeah, I think it just feels kind of maybe boring, or just like you're doing something so small every day. Like, how could this possibly be helping me get where I want to go? And, I should be doing more. I should be working harder. I should, be making this diet more complicated or whatever it is. But when you get really caught up in those details like that, you're sort of ignoring, again, those foundational principles that are the basis for meeting your goals, or the things that, even if it doesn't seem like each day is getting you a certain amount of progress, that in the long run, those little things are going to add up over time and be much more successful. And you're going to be able to actually keep doing them, versus those really complicated things that you just end up giving up because you can stick with them for maybe a week or two and then you kind of burn out.
Yeah, 100%. Of course, the small habits built over time. I'm definitely in that camp. And it's funny, I actually had this question written down, and you mentioned like, okay, it doesn't feel like it should work, or I feel like I should be doing more, or we have all these feelings or these thoughts in our head. And the question that I actually had written down for you, and this is based off of a post I saw on your Instagram, but the question was, how can we stop believing everything that we think?
Yeah, that's, I think it takes practice. Like, you have to, I think the first part is just becoming aware of how that is working, and just realizing that when you have a thought, you don't have to automatically act on it, or you don't have to, believe that it's true, or even if, that thought makes you feel a certain way, you can kind of start to examine that a little bit more. But I think really that, kind of that first step that can be kind of the hard part is sort of catching it in the moment, because we're so used to just immediately acting, or sort of reacting to our thoughts or our feelings without maybe pausing and kind of going, is this really true? Do I really need to act on this or believe this? So I do think that if you can just kind of start to generate that awareness and sort of take that breath or take that pause and start to recognize when that is happening, then you can start to decide how you want to respond to those thoughts or feelings, rather than sort of just acting out of habit.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the key right there. I always say that's like kind of, I mean, that's how you win, right? At life is if you're able to have that awareness to just have a little bit of separation between your thought or the input and the response, or the impetus to act and the response. And that realization that you just mentioned of like understanding that just because we think something or feel something, this is why I brought up this conversation. I mean, brought up this, right now in this conversation, is that it doesn't make it inherently true. And that's a hard thing, I think, for people to grasp. When I say it like this, it makes sense. People are like, well, yeah, like, duh, everything we think isn't true. But in that moment, it's very hard, because it feels true, right? Whatever the thing is, I'm hungry. I need to eat right now is one, right? Like I need that ice cream. Like that clearly is not the truth. No one has ever died from lack of ice cream. But in that moment, when I'm stressed from work, or when my boyfriend or girlfriend just got in a big fight with me, or when my kid is being annoying, or when I'm just tired and I open the fridge and I see that Ben and Jerry's looking at me, that feeling of I need this right now, it feels like the ultimate truth of everything. So, what tools or like, techniques have you used personally or with your clients to kind of fight back against that immediate emotional reaction?
Yeah, and I do think again, it's like this takes a lot of practice. It's easier said than done, just like you were saying. Like it's kind of easy in hindsight to be like, oh, right, like I don't have to believe everything I think, but especially because we get into these patterns or these habits. And so the more that like you said, I feel hungry, so I immediately have to eat or whatever, and you start to do that over and over again, then it's a lot harder to kind of break that pattern. And so I do think that sometimes it can be realizing what those triggers are after the fact and like starting to either whether it's like writing that down or just again becoming aware. And then the more that you start to see that, even if it's still happening, you'll start to catch it a little bit earlier and a little bit earlier until you start to notice it as it's happening, and just kind of starting to recognize like when is this happening and like what else is going on around me when this is happening, and like what those triggers or cues might be that you might not necessarily realize are happening. Like you said, maybe it is you have that hard day at work, or you get in a fight with your partner or whatever it is, and you turn to the ice cream, but you weren't necessarily putting that together. It's just like all of a sudden you're thinking, why am I, at the bottom of the ice cream cart again? And if you can then go back and be like, oh, well, all these other things happen leading up to that. So next time that starts to happen, I can be more aware that that's my habitual response. I think that can be a really good strategy for starting to just start to recognize that a little bit earlier in the process, and kind of breaking down each of the steps and sort of figuring out where you can start to rewire or like repattern something else that you can do in that moment to respond, and just kind of having to find where kind of in that cycle you can break off and choose to do something differently.
Yeah, 1000%. I agree with a lot of different things you just said there. But before I want to bring something up that you just said. But before I do, I have to say, and people listening will know that I've changed my tune on this a lot, and because I've probably said this one phrase more than I've said any other phrase in the history of my life as a coach, as a nutrition coach, as a life coach, as a podcaster, and it's what you just said, which is easier said than done. And I've said that so many times on this podcast, and then I've always have to caveat everything I say with that now I actually hate saying it, and I hate that term. I hate that phrase, because everything is easier said than done. It's easier to speak than it is to act. It will always be that way, So it's like I'm like I've gotten tired of saying it, because it's like it's to me now it's like no duh, like no, like it's like well, when people say that to me, they're like, well, just eat less and move more. Well, easier said than done. Yes, I get that. Well, just be more aware of it. Well, easier said than done. Yes, I get, like, everything. It's easier to not do anything. So no matter what, it's always easier to not do anything. So like I get that, and like I just want to take that off the table for people listening, to have that as like an excuse. Well, like, yeah, well, like easier said than done. Like, yes, I get that. We can say that across the board, literally for everything. Let's just check that off. We know that everything in the world is easier said than done. And it's just kind of like, I'm over it now, So that's like my rant on that, because it's like, I'm like, I can't, everything I say, I feel like I have to caveat with that thing. But now I'm just like, if everything falls into that category, like, do I even need it to be a category anymore? So that's just
Right.
something I've been thinking about. But what I wanted to go back to was, you've used this term several times already. And this is, I teach entire courses on this, which is awareness, right? Everything, it seems to circle back to awareness, being aware of our surroundings, being aware of your environment, being aware of your food choices, being aware after the fact is something that you've mentioned already. So one is just, why do you think this one quote unquote simple thing, obviously easier said than done, is so challenging for people to not even master, but to even be aware that they need to be aware?
Yeah, that's a great question. For one, I think we're very distracted and we've kind of become habitually distracted or kind of doing a lot of different things. And so we're maybe not like tuning into our internal cues or kind of how we're feeling or how we're thinking. We're just sort of barreling through our day. And, just like you were saying before, it's like all of a sudden you're looking back and like, how did this happen? And um, besides just being distracted, I think too, it can be really uncomfortable to become aware. And people don't like to be uncomfortable. So when you start to notice these things, it can be really easy to not want to go there and to maybe sort of keep distracting yourself or sort of just not wanting to sit in that awareness or kind of face what that means and what you might have to do to make change or whatever it is. So I think a lot of it can just be that discomfort that comes with the awareness and not really whether it's not feeling ready to deal with that or just like not wanting to go there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you just brought up, being that, a lot of times you can think about it, but like, oh, like people are unaware and that they're just kind of don't realize, which is definitely obviously the case. But where you just said like awareness is uncomfortable. So sometimes it can kind of be this like almost purposeful, like I'm staying blissfully unaware of things because what would being aware of it means I have to acknowledge the problem. And it means that I actually have to maybe take blame or take, or I have to do something about it at the very least. Right. It's like when I don't know, you don't like when you're kind of in this like willful ignorance. You're just like, oh, well, yeah, I don't know. That's not my problem, So my question is like, have you seen, like within your practice, clients who have kind of been in this place? And if you see someone who they're kind of like, I don't know, putting their own blinders on themselves, how do you get them to either want to make the change or do the thing or be okay with sitting in that discomfort? Because someone like that, I feel like this is the type of person who's like, well, we'll use weight loss as an analogy because, obviously this is an easy one and you're a nutrition coach, and someone who says like, hey, I want to lose weight, but then they are the person eating a pint of Ben and Jerry's every night, where it's like, well, obviously those two things are kind of at odds for each other. Not obviously, of course, you can still lose weight by eating Ben and Jerry's, but let's just assume that they're doing other things where they're, whatever. So it's like there has to be some form of like willful ignorance and like trying to be unaware at that point. So like that's that's a different to me than someone saying like, well, I'm trying all the things, but like I'm not really getting the results. So what do you do with someone who's in that place on their journey?
Yeah, I think in that case, sometimes just seeing if they're willing to just maybe slow down, not necessarily make a change. Like, I think sometimes people aren't quite ready maybe to make a change, or like you were saying, if it sort of feels scary to sit with that discomfort or with that awareness and the discomfort that can come with that. Just starting by like slowing down and tuning in a little bit, or like just for a short amount of time. It's like you don't have to necessarily do anything with that, or you don't have to change it, but maybe just start to recognize it, or maybe put a name to what you're feeling or what you're thinking. And then you can, in your example, still eat the ice cream or do whatever it is, but just kind of notice it, instead of maybe totally ignoring it or not, wanting to deal with it. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to make a big change right now or do anything about it. But let's just start by that first little step of like, can you maybe sit with that discomfort for 30 seconds or 1 minute? Can you maybe put a name to it, to what you're feeling? But just like taking a little bit of time with it without necessarily having to like full on, embrace the discomfort or make a big change or do something drastic at that point.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you mentioned this in the beginning that people often think that they have to make this huge change where probably small changes are the best. So, if you're that person eating a whole pint of Ben and Jerry's, people are like, oh, I can't eat Ben and Jerry's anymore. It's like, well, what if you just went from eating a whole pint 5 days a week to, a half a pint 3 days a week or something like that. So I think that, yeah, I mean, it goes right into, and I think naming things are super powerful too. I've talked about that a lot on the show. So I think that that's a great one. And at this point, I mean, we've kind of like talked around it a little bit, but the real one of the big questions that I had for you, because I read a blog that you had written a couple months ago that really piqued my interest, which was simply titled, I think, "Why Diets Don't Work." I believe, I don't know if that was the exact title, but that was the gist of it. So I'm wondering if you could explain to people listening, what exactly you mean when you say diets don't work.
Yeah, so in my mind, there are a lot of reasons why diets don't work, but kind of the basics of it would just be that, when you think of a diet, I mean, I think we all kind of have a bit of a negative connotation with the word diet, like it comes with this idea of restricting and being kind of like a bummer and just like not fun and like something that you do short term. And um, I think that's a big thing with it. It's just kind of like the mindset that comes with being on a diet. And then there's the fact that like you're on your diet or you're off your diet. And like it's not a long-term thing, it's not sustainable. Um, all of these things that just sort of make it not like a good headspace to be in. And anything that is like really, not fun and not sustainable is not going to be something that is ultimately going to be successful. And I think that, there's all these like quote unquote different diets or programs out there, and people kind of are wanting to find like which one should I be doing, or like which one is the best, like what's the thing that's going to get me the best results. But ultimately, those are still like things that you are sort of grabbing onto to kind of, I guess, like outsource, especially your own like hunger and fullness cues, or just your own what you need, versus again, kind of coming back to that awareness thing and maybe being in that uncomfortable place of like what is actually working for me or not working for me, instead of like choosing a diet that you're going to follow or a meal plan that you're going to follow that is going to tell you what you should eat and how much you should eat or when you should eat or whatever it is. So I just think that diets inherently just have like all of these uh, things that go with them that just make it not really a great tool kind of in any sense. But I mean, also like you were saying at the beginning, like people are always going to say, oh, well, I did this and it worked. And yeah, there are going to be cases where maybe it works for a certain reason or a certain time, or for whatever scenario. But I think ultimately the idea of diets for kind of like reaching a goal, or for especially for maybe reaching like sustainable long-term health and wellness, is not a super successful strategy.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. And as I told you, before we started recording, the reason I wanted to have you on after I read your blog was because I've literally been trying to write this exact thing. I have like 3 different Google form notes open with the title like "Diets Don't Work," and every time I start writing, I open up this like Pandora's box wormhole of like all the different reasons. And I've spoken on some of these things before. Again, I totally agree. Diets have a negative connotation. Diets come with an end date, right? I say this all the time. It's like, well, what do you do? I diet for the summer, or I can diet until I can fit into that that dress or those pair of pants, or I diet until I can see my abs, or till that wedding or something like that. And inherently, if life is what we're doing, life only has one end date, and when it's over, you won't care what weight you are. So aside from that, it's like, why are we putting restrictions on what should just be healthy living? And I'm right there with you. I've spoken on some of that before, but something that you mentioned right there that I haven't heard this termed exactly in this way, and I would like you to expand on this a little bit more, was outsourcing your hunger and fullness cues. And what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, so by that I mean, if you're following a diet and you're trying to follow somebody else's idea of what you are supposed to eat, I think, or whether that's like a certain number of calories or macros, or certain foods or not certain foods, um, you are not really paying attention to your internal cues and what your own body is telling you in terms of whether you're hungry or full, or how different foods make you feel, or like what is actually satisfying to you, or like really enjoying food too, because we're just kind of following whatever plan. And so instead of kind of learning what is going to work best for you as an individual, you're letting some diet plan tell you what is supposed to work for you. And that diet plan does not know what is going to work for you.
Okay, I'm right there with you. But now to play devil's advocate, and because I know I will have heard this from hundreds of clients, I've done this for a long time. Why can't I just get told what to eat? Why can't I just get told what to eat? Is question one. And then question two is, you mentioned enjoying food, but isn't enjoying food the whole problem? Isn't that why I'm quote unquote fat or quote unquote unhealthy, because I enjoy food too much? So then going back to the first question of why isn't it right for someone to just tell me what to do so that I am not able to enjoy that food that I enjoy too much, like my nightly Ben and Jerry's? Like, isn't that the answer?
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many people have come to me and said, just tell me what to eat, just give me a meal plan. And, I could do that. I could tell you what to eat, but what's ultimately going to happen is you're not going to follow it anyway. Like, either life is going to get in the way and you're not going to be able to follow the meal plan. You're not going to like it. And nobody likes being told what to do. Like, even though we think that's what we want, when you actually go there, you start to kind of immediately rebel against it because you're like, somebody's telling me what to do and I don't like this. And so I think kind of step number one is just to realize that, like, even though it really feels like that's what you want, is like to just be told what to eat, that again, just kind of like the whole diet idea, it just doesn't work in the long run. Like, you might be able to follow it for a little bit of time, or you might even see results, but it's not really going to fit into the context of real life. Like, what happens when you can't follow that meal plan? You travel or you go on vacation or whatever it is, and suddenly you can't, eat this exact food that I've told you to eat. And the part about enjoying food, I think with that, again, it kind of comes back to that idea of starting to become aware and tuning into what your body is telling you. And like, there's when you are able to do that and kind of and learn to, I think, really enjoy food in maybe a different way than we're thinking of, just like, I'm going to eat all the food all the time, and like I'm never going to stop if you tell me that I can enjoy food. Like, that's ultimately, like, I don't think anybody's really going to do that. Like, when you are actually really enjoying your food, you're going to notice when you're satisfied and you're going to want to stop, and you're going to notice when, what things make you feel good or don't make you feel good. And I really just don't think that people are ultimately going to turn that into, like, I am just constantly eating food that's really bad, or just going to totally go off the rails because of that. I think ultimately that is not what happens.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I kind of like, I mean, again, I know exactly. It's like I'm talking to myself. We have a very, very common careers, and we've dealt with a lot of the same things, and I've had these same questions. That's why it's easy. I'm just asking you the questions that I've been asked hundreds and hundreds of times, and exactly that, right? People think that they want one way. They think they're just give me a meal plan and just I'll follow it to the T. But there's so many different reasons why that doesn't work, and as you said, like, life doesn't work like that, right? And this the biggest thing. I tell people all the time when people ask me for a meal plan, and I'm like, Google, YouTube.
Right.
Like if a meal plan was the answer, Google would have solved obesity 20 years ago. Right. It's just like, it's so simple. Like, everyone's like, I hate this thing because people will tell me like, oh, like, can you help me with a meal plan? Even just like friends, right? I don't even do nutrition coaching anymore. And it's like, people will just ask me, like, because they know I've done this for so long, but I'm just like, why? You know what to eat. No one in the history of ever has ever come to me like, I just don't know what I should be eating to lose weight. They always say something along the lines of, well, I know I'm eating too much of this, or eating too little of this, or I'm drinking, or I'm not exercising enough. So it's like, you already know what to do, but you're not doing it. So this comes into what my real interest is. And anyone who listens know this is what I like to talk about. And why I also wanted to talk to you is because it's really about psychology and behavior change, right? It's if everyone would follow meal plans, then again, the some doctor would say this is the best meal plan, and everyone would go, oh, thank you, doctor, and we would all just be healthy, and I would never have to have another podcast. But that's not how it is. So the my question for you then is like, what is the connection between what people say they want and yet people not taking the action to do that thing, right? Meaning people saying like, I want to have a meal plan. You write them a meal plan, they don't follow it. Or they say, I want to lose weight. And you say, well, here's what you have to do to lose weight. And then they don't do the thing. So how can we say that we want something, and when the answer is presented to us, not do that thing?
Yeah, I think a big thing with that is kind of, again, it kind of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of like trying to make things really complicated. And we look at this big picture of like, I'm here and I want to go all the way over here. And that looks really hard. And I'm going to have to do all these things and I don't want to do them. And it's going to take me a really long time. And you just kind of get overwhelmed before you even begin, right? So it's like your brain stops you before you even start, because you're trying to make a change. And like anytime you make a change, and you're doing something differently than what you've been doing, your brain is going to try to protect you from that because that feels uncomfortable. So you're going to have resistance right off the bat. And then especially if you're looking at something that is kind of a longer term goal, or again, maybe there are a lot of steps in between. It's just like any time you take on a big project and it just feels super overwhelming, so you procrastinate, you don't start because it just feels too hard. And so I think that's what really like breaking it down into those really small steps and finding like just what is that first step. Like, let's not think about where you're trying to get in the end or what all the steps are in between, but just like, what is your next move in the next 5 minutes, the next day, whatever it is. Like, just do that one little thing, and then from there we'll do the next little thing. And that can really like kind of, I think, calm down that sort of stress response and that resistance, and just focusing on that immediate next step and what you can do right now can make it a lot easier to get started.
Yeah, definitely. And again, this is so simple, and like people will hear this and go, well, yeah, but I just want it faster, or I just want to, and this is the thing. It's like, this is the answer for everything, right? Again, this is dieting, but this is exercise, and this is business, and this is relationships, and this is everything. When the change is too big, inherently, our brain will try to stop that change, because in evolutionary speak, change represents danger. It represents a fear response, because it's not safety, it's not what we've always done. And our brain is just a protection machine, and it's always going to try to protect us, and it's going to do the thing that is most evolutionarily responsible, and that's always going to be to stop us from change. So anytime you push up too hard against change, and this is why not only is it easier to do smaller steps, right? Like we break it down into smaller steps so that it's easier, but it's actually the only possible way. Because if you go the opposite direction, you go, I'm just going to change everything right now, tomorrow, it actually becomes impossible, because you trigger your brain's fear response, you trigger your safety response, which actually pulls the emergency brake. It activates that fear response, like you said, that their fight or flight response, and all these different things that go on literally biologically inside of us, and it kind of makes it impossible to do. So it's that thing of, as we keep going back to, just being aware that that you have the choice. It doesn't always have to be all or nothing, and it doesn't have to be like people think like, oh, I just want to get it over with, so I want to do it all fast. But you actually can't do it all fast. Like, you can't speed it up, no matter if you wanted to or not, right? Like weight loss, again, getting rich, be getting healthy, whatever your thing is, it is going to take time no matter what. So, kind of just accepting that, awareness is, if awareness is number one, then acceptance is number two. I'm always big on it. It's just like, you kind of just have to accept the realities that like, this is how it is, right? We are all humans. We are all animals at our base level. And, when we can kind of accept that, I think that will take us a long way too. And so much of this to me then has to do with time, right? And time is such like a interesting concept, because again, it's like, well, it takes so long, but it feels like forever, but forever is what's forever and all this stuff. So there was a quote in your Instagram that I don't think it was your quote. I think you had just posted it, but I actually really liked it. And I was wondering, why you posted this or what it made you think. And the quote was, days are long, but the years are short.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I heard that, but to me, it kind of just, I think what it made me think of is like, each day is going, like you were saying, you're not feeling like you're making progress day to day, but then like all of a sudden you look back and a year has passed, and you can, if you were to like think back to a year ago now, like what if I had started something back then and just done a little thing every day, like what I could have done now, and where I could be now. And I think like in our day-to-day life, yeah, just like you were saying, it's not going to feel like you're making progress by doing small steps, but ultimately the years are going to pass really fast. And like you said, with time, like time is going to pass either way. And if you start taking those little steps in your day-to-day life, even if it doesn't feel like that's getting you anywhere, or like, oh my gosh, this is going to take forever, this is the slowest process, that all of a sudden it's going to be a year later or 2 years later or whatever, and you're going to look back and realize how much those little steps have added up, and also like really how fast that time has passed.
Yeah, a funny thing about time to me, and I used to use this example a lot when I was working as a personal trainer, because again, I would tell people like, well, it's like realistically, it's going to take about, probably 6 months at least to get you anywhere. And then probably a year to get you real results. I'm like, what, like a year? I thought this was going to be like 2 weeks, because a year seems like so far away, right? It's like, what's a year from now? It's like, I don't even know what I'm going to be doing tomorrow or next week. And yet, as you just said, if I think about a year ago, it's like, I don't know, it's like a blink, right? We're recording this in March. I feel like it was just New Year's. Like the fact that it's already almost April is wild, because time passes. Like we have a different view of time looking back than we do looking forward, right? Even right now, it's March 2022. To say that like, oh, the pandemic started 2 years ago was right. Like it feels like forever ago, but it also feels like that was yesterday. So it's like this weird thing of like, we get so caught up in like, oh my God, it's going to take a year or 5 years to start my business or 4 years to go back to for my degree. But looking back on it, it's like, I don't know, time just passes in a weird blink. So I just think, to me, that's always like a little motivating to just be like, don't think about time like that. Just like, as you said, time is going to pass either way. That was 4 years, those 5 years, that year is going to go by. And we do these paradoxical things where we're like, oh my God, like 2 years to get a degree, that's way too long, but then don't do anything. And then those 2 years pass and now you don't have a degree and those 2 years have gone by, gone by already. So it's like, again, easier said than done, but to have this with that awareness ahead of time, I think is super helpful. But, thinking of time, use of time and things like that. Again, comes from your Instagram and some of your writing, but I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit about what exactly the difference is between being effective and being efficient.
Ooh. Yeah. So I think, when you're being effective, like you're actually getting the job done. When you're being efficient, it's like you're doing it fast and like wanting to, I guess, either find that balance or like make sure that you're doing things that are actually effective versus just like, yeah, I'm getting to that end result really fast, but am I actually doing it well? Like, am I doing the thing that I actually want to do, or am I just sort of like getting it done? So I think sometimes we can kind of want to choose like, what is the most efficient route to getting to that goal or getting that thing done? But then you kind of get there and it's like, oh, that didn't maybe work out the way I wanted, or it's like not actually hitting the goal that you wanted. And so kind of trying to figure out like, really what is going to actually be effective for you in the long run, rather than maybe just like getting you to your endpoint really quickly, but not maybe actually achieving what you wanted in the end.
Yeah, I get that. Do you have any like examples that come to mind of like things that in your life or maybe with your clients or something like that of times when like you can that can kind of just like build on that a little bit for people listening to really like hammer that point home?
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember this Instagram post too. I don't know if I included one in there. Did I include it? Did I include?
No, I don't remember. I was just scrolling and it just stood out to me because I think
Yeah.
about this a lot where I think of like effective and efficient. Like effective is to me like busy work. Like I'm checking a lot of boxes. Whereas efficient, right? Is like busy work where I'm like checking a lot of boxes and I'm getting a lot of things done. But
Mhm.
effective is I'm getting the thing done, right? Like
Right.
whatever like my thing is. So, like if you ever there's a book called The One Thing, right? Where it's like,
Mhm.
what is the one thing that if I get this done, that everything else becomes either easier or irrelevant, right? So
Right.
we all have that one thing where if it's for my podcast, I can talk about social media, and I can talk about sending emails, and I can talk about going to podcast meetups and all these different things. But if I'm not recording good quality podcasts and getting good quality guests, all that other stuff just kind of falls flat. But I can make myself feel really good about it, right? I can pat myself on the back and be like, oh, but I'm doing so much work and I'm staying busy and like I'm making sure that I'm getting to all this stuff. So it's like, and I feel like that people get, the reason I brought this up is because I feel like people get caught in that loop so often where they're like, it would be easier, I think, or it's one thing if it's like, I'm not doing anything, right?
Mhm.
Like people get that. They're like, well, I mean, of course I don't get any results if I don't do any work, right? If I don't exercise, I don't get any muscles. If I don't try to build a business, I don't get a business. But to me, when we it's actually worse when we get caught in this like uh efficiency trap, because it's like we don't have that. We're like, what do you mean? Like I'm doing all of the things. I'm checking all of the boxes. I'm doing it. And to me, that's like I call it the seventh circle of hell. Actually in the gym, I used to call it this when people are doing the thing where they're going to the gym, they're in the gym 5 days a week for an hour or something like that. But because they don't know proper training form, they don't have a good program, they're just doing cardio all day or something like that, they're not getting the results they want. So it's like now it's a double whammy because you're doing so much and you're getting anything. And to me, that's like the reason this is important, because that's how people give up. Right. When they're like, what do you mean? They're like, what do you mean? I tried. Like I tried. I can't, like, can't hold it against me. I gave it my best shot. So like, that's like, to me, why I wanted to just kind of talk about this for a bit, because I think that people often get caught up in that loop of being like, well, I am doing stuff, but it's like, we don't want to just do stuff. We want to do the right stuff.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes back to what we were talking about before, kind of with the diets or the meal plans too, where it's like, yeah, you can do that and be like doing all these things that are really hard and complicated. But like you said, are you actually doing the things that matter? Like, would it make more sense to like get an extra hour of sleep and maybe get a lot more results from that than like the really complicated meal plan that you're trying to follow? And um, yeah, I think it kind of comes back to that um, sort of that mindset we were talking about at the beginning about wanting to make things really really complicated, because then it feels like you're doing something, and if it's hard then it feels like you're making progress, when really if you simplify it and just get really good at doing the basic things consistently, that's a lot more effective versus maybe the efficiency of like doing a ton of stuff but not doing any of it very well.
Yeah, it's also kind of paradoxical in that, the reason people try to be super efficient is because they want to do less, right? They want to save time in the long run. They want to do all this stuff, but by doing that, they end up shooting themselves in the foot and getting less result done or something. Whereas you said, if you were just focused on the one thing, maybe getting some more sleep and drinking a little bit more water, you would actually get more result. And it's actually pretty simple. It doesn't seem that way. It actually seems too simple. And then we don't do it. So it's weird. Humans are weird. We're weird creatures. So, I mean, I appreciate that, all of that we've been talking about. And I just want to ask you one last question. And this is the question I ask all my guests before they leave, which is just, if you had one action step, one piece of advice, but an actionable step that people can take right now today, as soon as they take their headphones out from listening to this episode, to start living a healthier, happier life. We've already talked about a bunch, obviously, and you can repeat one, or if you have a different action step in mind, I'd love to hear it.
I think I would say to take a deep breath, because I think that, again, like we did talk about sort of taking this pause and kind of like just taking a moment to become aware. But I just think like breath is really underutilized, not only to just like calm down your stress response or just kind of bring yourself back a little bit, and whether it's using it to create that awareness or just to, take a deep breath because we haven't done it all day or whatever. I think we're really kind of bad at breathing, to be honest. But I think it's just sort of, it's something you can do anytime, anywhere. It's like available to anybody all the time. And it can just be a way to, whether it's before you're eating to help you digest, whether it's when you're stressed out and you're, again, maybe you're trying to create that space between what you're thinking and feeling and what you're doing. But it's just something you can use all the time, and it's super useful. And I just think it's something that we don't do enough of.
100%. I couldn't agree more. It's actually interesting. I mean, you're not alone in that sentiment, because I've done about almost 40 of these interviews now, and I ask every person that same question, and everyone, it ranges, but breath is the one answer that comes up more than anything. And that's from health coaches, nutrition coaches, from financial planners to yogis and all different things everywhere. It's like, it's the one thing that's always within our control. It's right there. It's so easy. It's the low hanging fruit of all low hanging fruit. So I'm right there with you. I actually had a breath expert on. I'll link to that in the show notes for anyone listening. I had a whole episode on breath a while back. All right. Well, thank you for that, Megan. I really do love that. And just before I let you go, I would love for you to share anything that you have going on, and where can people find you to connect with you and read some of your stuff. I love reading your content, so I'm sure some of the listeners will as well.
Thanks. Yeah. You can definitely find me on Instagram. You can just look for Megan Schall, or it's at MFS Nutrition Coach. I'm also on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel where I've been kind of documenting my own health journey, as well as have some like health and wellness tips and tricks on there. So you can search for me on YouTube and Facebook as well. And then I do also have a free ebook you can download from my website, meganschall.com. There's a tab for the free download there that it's really just about a lot of what we were talking about, kind of focusing on those basics and those really simple things that you can do, and the small steps, mastering those basics to start to make progress rather than making things super complicated.
Awesome. Love that. And I'll have the links for all of that stuff in the show notes. And I look forward to connecting with you and, seeing what else you get up to, because I've had a great talk today. Have a great one. And I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.